Hello, everybody. It is your favorite person you never heard of and probably don't really care that much about. I'm Skyler Satterfield, and I'm joined today with a good old friend of mine, Annabell, but she decided to go by Annie Blay for this stream. So we're having a debate on taxes because that's totally not a contentious issue. Here's the rules that we have agreed to. There will be a 5-minute introduction perspective, and she said I could go first, and then she'll have a 5-minute introduction of her own. Then there will be two 8-minute rebuttal perspectives, a 15-minute open discussion, and assuming that anyone actually participates in the live chat, there will be a 15-minute time where we'll have a conversation with the chat. Two more 8-minute rebuttals and two 5-minute closing statements. That's 82 minutes, assuming that we use all of that time. If no one's in the chat, we'll just skip the 15-minute the 15-minute addressing of the chat, which would cut it down to 67 minutes. We've also agreed that we will yield back our time if we're not using it, or if we don't use all of that time. Anyhow, basically, we both have said we're gonna go. I'll go first. Okay, so my position on taxes is pretty straightforward. Is that the people of our country don't get exactly their money's worth. You see this all the time in recent history with the money that the federal government has taxed from the American people. You see where it goes, and you see how there are no consequences for the actions of the state in terms of the money that they spend. For example, during the Great Recession under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, we all saw how the economy went into a recession, and we spent trillions to bail out big banks, corporations, the automotive industry, and we also had seen the amount of special interest dollars that are sewn into these bills. Are called pork barrel spending. And every time you see that, you see people saying, "Wow, that's where my tax dollars are going," and that is why I have proposed that the United States should move to a flat income tax, based off of the first fact that it would force the state, if they were to abide by the idea of living within its means, the state would have no choice but to cut its spending, because they wouldn't be able to assume that they will have all this extra revenue if everyone pays the same rate, as well as the eventually we'd go from a flat income tax to no income tax on the federal level. We already have property taxes, we have sales taxes, we have a large number of other taxes that I won't even mention, as the list goes on and on and on. You have tariffs, which is taxes on trade. But essentially, the reason why we should move from a progressive tax to a flat income tax is simply because of the fact that during the administration of Dwight D. Eisenhower, you saw the income tax was at 91%. But when you looked further into it, you would see that the United States, that the millionaires and billionaires that lived during that time never actually paid anywhere near 91%, because they were able to buy off a congressman who would write into the tax code loopholes and deductions, and millionaires and billionaires were able to avoid paying those huge tax rates. And during that time, during the 1950s, under Dwight D. Eisenhower, you saw there was a lot of tax avoidance, tax resistance. People underreported about what they made on their taxes because they did not want to pay anywhere near that amount. The simple fact is that when the state is going to levy a tax, while they have that power under the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, there has to be a floor, or a ceiling, as to how high they could go before they can't go any further. And that a flat income tax, which means there's only one tax bracket, would slow the growth of federal spending and the growth of the state, because under the 1950s, there was 27 tax brackets. And during the Ronald Reagan administration, there was just 2. And then it went up to 7 during the Barack Obama presidency, and it's been that way ever since. But the idea of getting rid of the flat income tax, to get rid of the income tax, is that the United States needs to abide by the federal Constitution, and that the states and the cities need to step up, and they need to provide these services as they're closer to their constituents, versus the federal politicians, who are often a far distant capital, who are not that in touch with the needs of the constituents. They do not abide by the wishes of the American people. State representatives and senators, as well as local elected officials, are oftentimes more in touch, as they're within the same state and the same city and the county. But essentially, it's about cutting spending. It's about cutting the national debt. It's about reining in the powers of the state. And that is what leads me to conclude that it would be better off on that front. We can get into the ethics of taxes later on, but I'm about out of my time, so I will yield the rest of my time.
Okay. All right, I will start my time now. I was not prepared for this, so I'm just gonna keep talking like this is a conversation, because I don't know how else to approach this with the way I have things set up. So my approach to this basically is that wealth flourishes when competition breaks down. The top 1% makes about 20 times more annually than the average people in the United States. That is about $538,926 dollars to be able to be in the 1% as of 2020. The average person makes about $82,000, 535 annually. I can say personally that my own family, who is middle class, makes about a little bit less than 50,000 a year combined. And the taxes that we pay right now already affect us. I don't think that we should raise the taxes on average people. I think we should raise taxes on the 1%, but that is not the only approach that we should have to attack that, especially in a capitalistic society where people already oppose the raising in taxes in so many ways. There has to be other approaches that we also take to make this work. For that, I want to state that only 1.4 million percent of, or 1.4 million people met the threshold to be in the 1% as of 2020. So in that, 90% of the average people only paid 26% of of the taxes this year. And the 1% paid about 38.5% of taxes. But that is not a what is it? Even rate of pay when the 1% makes about 20 times more than the average person. But on top of that, another way that we would have to combat this is attacking the homeless situation and how much we spend on the military. And that is a very radical left position, I suppose. But with having about 5,800 people, I'm not saying these numbers right, 5,800,000 people homeless in the United States, and having over 600,000 vacant homes, and just spending about 6.6 billion on residential construction projects a year is what we spent in 2020. So we were building all these homes with all these homeless people, and that's just a bunch of money that is disproportionate in society. So a way to even this out, we can put, because it is expensive to be homeless, and that is something we cannot deny. So we have these people putting more into the economy that they cannot do. If we can get these people into a stable position with everyone else, we can have the economy flow in a much more even way. Again, that would go into the wealth flourishes when competition breaks down stereotype. There not be people competition to competitive to survive. And that's really what you want to do here. You want to make sure people have the ability to make things flow without like harming more. On top of that, the Department of Defense gets about 686 billion a year for funding, and that goes up and down depending on who's president and whatever and what's going on. But about 69 billion of that is spent on war funding, and that war funding goes straight into things for like fossil fuels. Like in Iran right now, the fighting that is so unnecessary. It's just having all this money that's spent on nothing. So we have the 6.6 billion spent on residential projects for homeless people that aren't getting these homes. And then we have $69 billion on war funding that none of this needs to happen. That can all go towards the people. And if you do that on top of keeping the tax rate for how people are living right now and also raising the minimum wage, that would also allow people to have a livable income. That would even out things to allow the economy to flow more evenly. We wouldn't have to worry about recessions and depressions the way that we do right now. I don't know how much time I have right now.
You have only 20 seconds.
Okay. Well, oh goodness. All right. I'm done then. Okay. Yeah. I proceed my time.
Okay, so you got done just about 14 seconds ahead of when you were required to, abiding by the rules of the agreement. Okay, so now we move into the 8-minute rebuttal perspective. I honestly doubt that I'm going to get through all of this in 8 minutes. That's not saying I'll use more than 8 minutes. I think I'll use a lot less than that. So let's see. Wealth inequality. Well, actually, let me. Well, to address your first point, wealth inequality, I'm not going to deny that it's a problem. And while I do honestly mean that, I do understand that it is a problem. I will say, however, that raising taxes is only going to do so much. First off, I mean, the question would then be, how much do you want to raise taxes by to close that deficit between the top 1%, as you say, and everybody else? And considering the fact, because I'm assuming you're in favor of a wealth tax. If you're not, correct me. But I believe it was somewhere in Europe, they abolished their wealth tax because wealthy people did not cooperate. They did not pay up. They simply left the nations that were implementing wealth taxes to. They were leaving those nations so they wouldn't have to pay them. And this is not me saying that poor billionaires. No, it's simply put that Europe ended up killing the wealth taxes, their wealth taxes, because no one was going to comply, as well as the fact that if no one's complying, then the law is not worth the paper it's written on, and if it's not worth the paper it's written on, then there's truly no point into having it. Raising taxes on average people, I agree that should not happen. I would say that people who make under certain thresholds, if they're not paying taxes already, if they are paying taxes already, they shouldn't. They should be exempt from the federal income tax. I would argue that it would be better if we looked at all the taxes that we do have currently and see which ones apply to the poor the most and give them a break. For example, if you're a server in a restaurant, or you are in a business where people can give you a tip, you shouldn't have to pay a single dime of taxes on those tips. This one's going to be a little awkward, but the same thing applies to if you're a content creator on a certain website that gets dogged on sometimes. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. But apparently some of the people there do pay taxes. They do pay taxes on the money they get from that. They shouldn't. They should not be paying a single dime on those taxes. because that would go into another thing is that you as a human being do not live solely to pay to fund the government. There's more to your life than a paycheck. There's more to your life than simply making some money and only having 2 days of the week off. 1.4 million people meeting the top 1%. That is true. I would love to see more average people become millionaires and billionaires, albeit I would like to see them still have some humility. Like if they're a philanthropist like Mike Bloomberg, preferably not running for president. Military spending, this is an area where we're going to agree. I would love to see the defense budget. You said it was like 600 billion. Last I checked, I thought it was 700 billion dollars in military spending. I would either way. I'd rather see the federal military budget be cut by 43% in 8 to 10 years. The money in question would go towards paying to reducing our federal budget deficit, as well as getting the eventually bring us into a budget surplus to pay down our $27 trillion national debt, as well as bringing all the troops home from our forever wars. That would reduce a lot of the money we spend. It would make it a lot easier to get not only our people, allowing our people to have the confidence that their tax dollars aren't being wasted, but it would also show that we're putting our priorities at home, not around the world. Now, tackling the homeless problem, as you mentioned, I would fully agree. My solution to that, though, wouldn't really be about raising taxes. It would be having the cities not destroy many homes that were built by those who had volunteered to build them. The city of Los Angeles, I believe it was either 2019 or somewhere around then, destroyed a bunch of homes that were built for the homeless. They were insulated. They look like sheds, but they were insulated so that they wouldn't freeze to death. It was nothing fancy, but it was something to allow them to not die in the elements. As for raising the minimum wage, I will leave that for a separate discussion. I would say I would like to see the minimum wage gradually raised, but not artificially. But I would love to see wages rise, but not artificially as a state mandate. I would say it would be through people saying, look, I'll work for you, but if you think you're just going to pay me $10 an hour with no benefits, you're out of your mind. And I would say that would be a more productive approach and a more realistic one, because Congress is not going to pass a minimum wage increase, whether we like it or not. The overall with millionaires and billionaires, I have zero problem with getting rid of all the exemptions and the loopholes and the tax deductions that they have. I would love to go through the tax code and completely clear that out so that they don't have these areas where they could write off going on a yacht to a seminar, and anything they buy there, they'll just use that as an excuse to write that off so that they pay less in tax, as that would be a way for them to pay the full tax rather than increasing the tax bracket. And seeing how there are tax havens and tax havens and places where they can avoid paying taxes is where they'll go. And there's no laws that you can pass to deal with that. What would be preferable is to see the federal government completely reorganize the way they spend money so that people will not groan as much as they do about paying taxes and go through the process of refusing to pay their taxes, underreporting, by either working under the table, which means that they're not on the record working, as a number of people can do, although it has its own risks, but also getting a zero-based budget mandated in the Constitution where every dollar has to be justified. Overall, the city of Seattle passed a minimum wage law in 2014, and the economic growth of the state of Washington slightly outpaces the economic growth of the city of Seattle, and there were lost income and in the city. I would argue that in terms of if we're going to raise the minimum wage, is we ought to experiment in large cities like New York State and City, experiment in states at large and see, does this work or does this not? Because if it cannot work on a citywide basis or a statewide basis, I can assure you it's not going to on a national basis. But wages absolutely should rise. I only have a few seconds left, so I yield back.
Right. So I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. So, like before this, I didn't really look into what it would mean to, hold on. He's causing problems. I'm sorry. But so I do agree with a lot of what you're saying. I never really looked into what it would mean to be like to have a like justify each dollar. However, my only argument to that would be like who would define what is justified for that to be spent on, and how would that like be measured? I'm sure like you have a way of saying that, but like conservatives and then progressives will deem each thing different. Taxes, for example, don't go towards abortions the way people think they do. However, it does go towards Planned Parenthood, and how some people aren't going to think that's justified. So I feel like there's a lot happening around me. So basically, just I don't understand how we would be able to unify as a country who has like opposite sides fighting when they're basically representing the same thing. How would we unify with that and choose where it would be justified to tax things? And for my other points, I really agree with what you were saying about the rich. And one thing I had down was basically that the trickle down effect really does work, but I really feel like it should be more extreme than it is. Because obviously it's something's not working. There's still people who aren't okay. And so really I feel like I'm on the extreme left. And so for my way to work, everything would have to change. And that would be an extreme thing that not everyone would accept. And on top of that, the rich really do hide things. They hide things and they put things abroad to not pay taxes on them. And that's a really big problem that would have to be solved also, for any of that to work, because that's a lot of tax money that's not being used or spent anywhere. It's just being hidden away. Hold on.
I paused her time, so this isn't going to count against her time. I don't know how much time she's exactly going to use, but we will allow her to use that time when she gets back. I doubt there's anyone in the live chat. Nope, there's no one in the live chat. I'm going to shill this out right now.
Okay. I am back, but I don't think I have anything else to say. So I yield my time. I don't know if you're talking, but you're muted.
Hide the professionalism. Okay, so there's no one in the live chat, so we'll probably skip that. Okay, so now the next 15 minutes is going to be an open discussion, so it's kind of a back and forth. I'll respond to what you say, and then you respond to that, and then we'll just go for 15 minutes. Then we're probably just going to skip the live chat part, and then we'll just go into other rebuttal perspectives. I guess we can make other points that we didn't make before, and then we'll have two 5-minute closing perspectives, and that will be that. So here we go. Okay, so responding to what you said, who justifies spending? It would have to be the people who are proposing that spending. So, for example, if you had a members of Congress who said, "Mr. President, we really ought to be spending X amount of dollars to repair infrastructure," you have to justify why that number of dollars is justified. You need to prove how you know for a fact that that is the amount of money needed to pay for it. You would have to provide where it's going to come from, and you would also have to show, you'd also have to guarantee that the money is going to be there to pay for it. You mentioned about how we unify. I would say that it would be people not always looking to the federal government. We have a 10th Amendment for a reason, and the 10th Amendment kind of dictates the powers between the states and the federal government. And because of that, we could say, all right, the state of Florida will have its own way of spending money. It can do what it wants with its infrastructure rather than having the taxpayers in Louisiana pay for it, or the state of Pennsylvania really enjoys, not enjoys, but their priority right now is to spend their tax dollars in battling the opioid epidemic. We're not going to make the state of North Carolina pay for that. We're just going to have the states deal with these problems separately. If the state of California wants to try a wealth tax, they have the right to do so, and the consequences of it will be for theirs to deal with. It would be people understanding that if you want to unify, you need to stop relying on the state so much to get certain goals you want done. Progressives could just use city governments, state governments, as well as non-governmental organizations to attempt to get what they want through. Conservatives, and I don't identify as one for the record, conservatives could do the same thing with various issues that are important to them. You mentioned taxes don't go to Planned Parenthood. For abortions, I think they said only 3% of tax dollars go to abortions, although depending on how you uh, depending on who you ask, there will be those who will vehemently disagree. There is the Hyde Amendment the Hyde Amendment in place, and this is just to address the point she made. I'm not trying to open up the discussion on abortion. We can have that another time. But the Hyde Amendment is a legislative provision barring the use of federal funds to pay for abortion, except to save the life of the woman, or if the pregnancy arises from incest or rape. It took effect in 1980. Before it did, 300,000 abortions were performed annually using taxpayer funds. Going to the last point, you called yourself the extreme left, and already attack ads are being made about what we've been saying so far from both parties. I would say that I don't really view it in terms of partisan politics. If you're for or against raising taxes, I would view it as a term of priorities. My priorities are to get the state out of people's lives and to radically downsize it. I would be considered a part of the extreme right on taxes and spending, because I want to get taxes down, to get spending down, and if we have to get spending down before taxes down, that's fine. But we also ought to look at having a lot fewer taxes in people's lives, whether it's on sales, whether it's on sometimes there's just sin taxes. So there will be taxes on cigarettes, on alcohol, on various drugs, and at some point someone has to ask, how badly does the state need the money in order, if they're going to tax you on almost everything, whether it's your property, your sales, or your income. In the end, I'll wrap up so you have some time. We have 11 minutes left. But the point I would end off with is I don't view it in terms of partisan politics. I view it as priorities. And, well, we're going to be on the same timer anyway, so I yield to you.
Okay. Yeah. Again, really, I don't disagree with any of the points you're making. Just I think the way that you're going about it is much more like personal and like down to individuals and how it's going to affect them. And my way is much more federal and on the like national level, and the things that I feel can be decreased and regularized, because we have things like we have defunding in places already that are very casual, like the teachers, and it's so easy to do it. It goes right by, and it doesn't really help anyone to defund these teachers, but we can defund other things. We could go into arguments about how defunding the police and then going about them differently would help us. And I feel like that directly applies to other things too, such as taxing the rich, and then the military and all these other things that are that waste a lot of money that could be spent on the people directly. So I feel like that money just really needs to circulate back into the people, and that's where my priority seems to stand with this as of right now, because I haven't done as much research as you, I don't think. So yeah, but with that, I yield my time.
I bought a new microphone today, so I could just press a button on it so that it turns my mic, it mutes my mic, so I don't have to go keep touching that to mute it. I'm not as good at technology as people think I am. Anyway, let's see. You made a few points. Funding teachers, I know this is going to be maybe a little controversial. I would say all education should be localized in terms of making sure that people who oversee these departments are in touch with the people, so that on the local level, because we have a state board of education and a city board of education. They handled my graduation last year, as they're going to handle yours. Essentially, they should be the top, not the United States Secretary of Education. It should be the state board of education and a more local board of education. Although preferably, I prefer those to be just abolished, and that the parents use the powers that they actually have, that they don't use on education. A number of reforms need to be made on education, whether it's teachers' pensions, teacher unions, that need to be made, so that it's the student that is the top priority, not the bureaucrats that are not held accountable by anybody. Because it's easy to vote for a member of the Board of Education who is an elected official, but those who are appointed to those positions, they're not held accountable to anybody. You're not going to see a backlash election where they're saying, if you elect me, I will fire that bureaucrat. You don't see that type of polarization entering into that the most local of politics. So with education, it should be radically decentralized, as the education approaches that are taken in a state like West Virginia are not going to apply to the District of Columbia. As for defunding the police, I do agree with defunding the police on the grounds that policing should not be that expensive. It's another way of reining in the government when what they're going to respond to is reined in, so that they focus on actual crimes, not made up stuff like, oh no, that guy happens to have marijuana, therefore we got to ruin his life and throw him in prison because he was driving while he was black. But also I guess you did get it right that my view of my philosophy on this is more local and more on the individual. But it's also just based off of the fact that we do live in a democratic republic where we do have a separation of powers. There are things that states can do, as long as it doesn't fly in the face of the Constitution. They can do it using the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, and there are things that the feds can do, as long as it doesn't violate the 10th Amendment and doesn't infringe on the rights of a sovereign state to do what it pleases. And there are ways that you could indirectly influence them via any federal dollars they get. You could say, we're going to withhold this unless you do what we're asking you to do. It was and the example I'm citing would be, when I pull it up, it would be the Supreme Court case of Dakota versus Dole. It was handed down in 1987 under the Supreme Court by William H. Rehnquist. It was where the state of Dakota had sued the Secretary of Transportation Elizabeth Dole, because she withheld funds at the direction of the President Ronald Reagan. She withheld funds from the state because they would not raise their drinking age to 21, as it wasn't always at 21. So the point is, they found that it was not unconstitutional. Their holding was, quote, Congress may attach reasonable conditions to funds dispersed to the states without running afoul of the 10th Amendment, including requiring them to have a minimum legal drinking age of 21 for major highway funding, close quote. So the point is that the way we can deal with taxes, the way we can deal with spending, the way we can deal with government priorities, it can be through states and local and municipalities getting them done rather than the feds, as there's a lot less gridlock and polarizations in those local legislatures, but also asking the critical question of, should we even be using the state as the vehicle in which we do this to begin with? As you see how dysfunctional Congress is. They have the slimmest majorities right now. They're not going to get any of these big progressive or conservative proposals through. And with that, I yield back to Annabelle.
Okay, what part is this now? What am I doing? You're muted.
We're still in the open discussion, so this is a very freestyle conversation, even though neither of us can rap.
Okay. Well, I really don't think I have anything else to say. So I'm just going to yield my time.
Okay. So so we've gotten 32 minutes of actual timed debate on the record, so that's good to see. Let's see. The next thing would be rebuttal perspectives. Although I guess we could use half of that time to just make the point, and after 4 minutes, we just go to the other one where you make your points, we write them down, and then we'd spend the next 4 minutes each rebutting the other points. Or I guess you pose a question to me, I'll answer it in less than 8 minutes, and then I'll pose some questions to you. You try to answer them in 8 minutes. Does that sound good?
Yes, I'll see if I can think of some questions, but yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so let me start the timer again. This will be, let me see, who would be going first under this? So it would be you going first under the rules. So just think of the most random questions off the top of your head, say them on camera, I'll write them down. Then I will, all the questions you can think of off the top of your head, just ask them, and then I will respond, and we'll just get this done in 8 minutes. So I'll mute myself, ask all the questions you got on spending and taxes.
Okay. Do you think that in any way this would have to affect trade tariffs? And if so, how? And also, would there have to be anything else that we do, like as a country or on a federal level, in your opinion, to be able to fix the problems that are like so persistent in this country, besides what could be done with taxing or lack of taxing? Let me think. I want to know if in any way this would affect the economy. Like how, if you want to go with the slow approach, of course things would go slower. But when I was reading about, when I first heard about your side on this, I read about it, and I just heard how it would affect the economy, and I'm just not really clear on what it exactly would do. I heard that it could, if it was like a direct move, it could really plummet the economy, but if it was a slow over time thing, it could really fix a lot of the problems in it. But I wasn't really sure. I don't think I have any more questions, so I yield my time.
Okay, so those are some good questions. So would this affect trade tariffs, and if so, how? Yes, this would. I fundamentally am totally on board with free trade. I love free trade. But if we got rid of income taxes and we said, all right, we're going to go back to before the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which was passed during the administrations of William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson, we would be doing what we did before any wars happened. We used to only have income taxes during times of war, and when the wars were over, so were the income taxes. So yes, we would be going. We would end up increasing trade tariffs. And that would be pretty contentious on the foreign policy front in terms of trading partners, but at the same time, uh, the federal we'd still be able to pay our obligations, the ones that we keep, because we would have to radically restructure the federal budget so that the money we get off of tariffs and sales taxes, whether they're federal or local, we would still cover those things, because it would be just the federal income tax. I'd like to see all income taxes abolished on the state, local, and federal level, but I can see that the federal level is more likely than all 50 states and the District of Columbia saying, yeah, we'll have all our income taxes abolished. But we would simply put we would raise tariffs. We would ultimately push through uh, uh, radical restructuring of the budget, mandating it has to be balanced, that every dollar has to be explained, and you have to justify it. You have to explain how you're going to make sure it's there. That would be the first part. Then you basically asked, would there have to be something else we would have to do to fix our persistent problems with taxes, or lack of taxes? It would be through a lot of coalition building, people having to come together with a common purpose, with a goal in sight, even if they don't all agree as to how to do it. They have to acknowledge that there is a problem, and whichever solution can pull the most support, provided that it's right, that we can do with human beings, not using the state as a vehicle, it can be a way we can do it. For example, if you find a company that is not doing the right thing in terms of paying its workers or keeping up with safety requirements, I would say boycott that entire company, make them financially, have a heart attack, and say to them, if you want these people working for you, here's what you're going to have to abide by, and this is non-negotiable in terms of, I'll work for you, but if you're not going to provide me the things that I need to stay safe while I'm working, then I can't in good faith work for you. But it would also be people understanding that the state only is able to do so much. The country is so large that one person being president of the United States is not going to be able to do everything, based off of the separation of powers, and knowing knowing that that they have people there for a reason that will give them their best advice as to what to do. And as to how slow this would go, I've heard this argument before from other people who don't agree with abolishing the federal income tax. This would have to go very slowly. The first thing we would do is those who pay the least in taxes, who are also the poorest, they would be the first ones that would have, for example, if they just paid taxes last month, this would be the last month they'd ever pay taxes. If the abolition of the federal income tax began, we're going to effect this June, if Congress passed an amendment to do so, and eventually we would slowly but surely, wean the state off of the tax dollars. It would gradually lower rates. It would lower tax rates, but at the same time, we would push all the loopholes and deductions away. And some people would be afraid they'd be paying more in taxes, like average people. But they wouldn't have to worry, because they wouldn't be paying any income taxes to the federal government anymore. So they wouldn't have to worry about their taxes going up to them, because of the fact they wouldn't be paying any at all to the feds. And as for everybody else, it would again have to go slowly so that we could readjust our spending priorities and the way we have our economy function. Because if we just overnight the federal income tax, you would effectively see the economy would crash, as we wouldn't have a way to respond instantaneously to get ourselves out of an income tax based economy to one where we use tariffs and sales taxes and other things like that. I also just realized, I wish I would have mentioned this in my opening statement, but I hope we can use some of this time later on to talk about who actually pays the most in taxes, because I think that really matters when you go beyond just income. You go sales and property and all of those other things. So that's just the time I'm going to use. I yield back. You go ahead. Actually, I do have some questions. If we were to raise taxes on the top 1%, at what threshold would you not go past? how do you ensure that we avoid tax revolts, tax avoidance, underreporting, and how do you respond with people who move into states that don't have a state income tax so that they can pay even less on taxes in general?
Okay, I'm just gonna have you repeat one to me at a time so I can answer you. So what was the first one?
The first one is, how do you deal with how would you propose if we do raise taxes in the top 1%? What's a threshold you wouldn't go past in terms of a percentage they pay? At what point would you say, all right, I don't think we can tax them any further?
I would say I want to go past like 45%, because 50% of your income is really a lot. But when you are not using even 50% of your income, billionaires, trillionaires, that is a very, like, for the average person, for people who make 500,000, even that I think should not be taxed that much. But when you go up to billionaires and trillionaires, millionaires, there's so much room for, and I don't think it would be the same for all of the 1% either. It would definitely be billionaires and stuff way up there would end up paying like 45%, somewhere around that, more than they are right now. And then people who make like 500,000, maybe like 30%. But that's still a lot more than we would be getting like right now.
Okay, and in response to that, okay, so how would you propose? Let's say you were the president and you could appoint an attorney general and all the people that the Justice Department. How would you propose that they counteract tax evasion, avoidance, and underreporting? And how would you propose we deal with offshores, where people offshore their tax dollars so they don't have to pay on it? How would we counteract that if we did raise taxes on the top 1% and we had a wealth tax? Go ahead.
That's a good question, because I'm honestly not sure how we would be able to tax things that people are actively hiding. How would we be able to spot what people are trying to avoid? I suppose it would be the same way that average people are already being taxed on certain things. That you can't hide the boat in your driveway, but you can hide your yacht way off on some island somewhere if you're rich. So I suppose it would have to happen at the base of where people get things. It would have to be tracked better, and that would be a much more local individual thing. And it would have to I'm not really sure, I guess, how it would have to be regulated, but the regulations would definitely have to go up.
So the two questions I would pose in response are, uh, how would we be able to track that, and would the and if it's the state that's tracking it, would they have the authority under the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution to do so, uh, to track, to find out where these people who are offshoring their dollars are going, or where they're at?
I mean, when I think of it, I really think of it in a way that's like how we know people have guns and what guns they have and how they are able to have them. Um, and that's probably sound really extreme and weird, and I'm probably not explaining it right. But the way that these um, high taxation things, they would have to be tracked. They're like um, when someone buys something, it's usually off the market. However, you can't stop it when it's from someone who's not like, who doesn't, like, if you buy a car, that's automatically on a record, but if you buy it from an individual, that's not on record at all. And that is the way that they are going about those things. So I don't know if it's even possible to go about things people are not going through with the government. So I was not ready for this. I was not ready for this debate. Yeah. So I guess I can't answer that.
That that's all right. I mean, to be fair though, on the car example, if I buy a car from someone, I do have to get a new title. Just saying, and not. And as for the other example, not all guns are traced. I mean, if you got it from a family friend, you're not gonna update the records immediately, and you shouldn't. Anyhow, I don't, I'm not exactly sure who would be the one who would be informed that our good buddy Robert J. Billionaire, bought a certain yacht that was worth $5 million I mean, I guess if there's a way that the feds or the states or local governments have a record system in place where, oh yeah, Robert J. Billionaire is paying God only knows how much on like these yacht payments. They could find out that all right, he has to be making some bank to have that much money to spend on a yacht. Um, and hmm. Okay, I'm just going to ask for it real quick because I know you mentioned in one of our other chat comments, you said something like, "Someone does not need all that money." Do you want to Do you want to use the next like 8 minutes, like any points that you want to make and I want to make? We could just use the next 16, the next uh, uh, 16 minutes, just going through it because I don't imagine other rebuttal perspectives we could bring in other than new points if we want to do that. But yeah, that's all I have to really say. So I'm going to yield back. So we're going to go from the open discussion into rebuttal perspectives, but it would be you going first. So you make the points you want to make for 8 minutes, and then I make the points I want to make for 8 minutes, and then we go into closing statements. Does that sound good?
Yes. Let me see. Gosh, I was not ready for this. I don't know the points I would want to make. I guess I'll just talk. Yeah, I guess I'll start my time. So, I guess I really just agree with a lot of what you're saying. A lot of it is a lot more progressive than I was really thinking it was going to be. Um, I guess what I'm trying to say though, pretty much is just keep like we can keep taxing, but it should really have a lot more things going into it than what's happening right now. There's a lot more effort that can be made, and there's a lot more places that we can look into that can help people than the people. The people really aren't responsible for everything that's happening right now. It's a lot of these big corporate things, military, the government, that are causing these problems. And we can't really lay that on individuals. And that's pretty much what you're saying too. And so I really agree with that. Um, I don't have anything else to say right now, but I'll let you talk for now.
Um, I think if I think if we went further into like spending priorities and oh gosh, I did not just kick her out, did I? Messaging her to see what's going on. Oh, there she is.
Sorry.
I'm hoping I did not accidentally kick you out because I was wondering if I did. Um, okay, so as I was saying, let me actually restart my time. Yes. Okay, so you said I'm my views on this are more progressive than you thought. Not if we went further into what exactly the feds should be doing. I guess it would not be as progressive. I'm not like this Republican apologist or anything, but I would say that a lot of the things that the feds are trying to do, they should not do, as they don't have the constitutional authority to do, and those policies aren't even good to begin with. But next point you said keep taxing, but have more things that are going into it, more places we can look into. Um, if I had it my way, if I could be a dictator for a year, and all the proposals I'm making were to go into effect fast enough, but not too fast, so that we have a smooth transition from the status quo to what's new. Um, we would be having a lot less places to tax. I would not propose getting rid of the corporate income tax. I'm not proposing that at all. They'd still be paying the taxes they are now. I wouldn't be cutting their taxes. But the individual income tax, that I would say that the housing, healthcare, education, and the environment can all be better handled on the state-by-state level, as well as international treaties to deal with these problems rather than having these huge spending proposals like the Green New Deal in place. I would say we could do a lot better by having those proposals. We would do better by bypassing the state and just going with individuals pledging to be better people, with taking better care of the environment, changing their lifestyles, as that can have an impact on their health, etc. My proposal in terms of spending, would be two constitutional. Well, actually, it'd be two constitutional amendments. One would be a line item veto, meaning the president of the United States could take a pen. I don't have one nearby me, but imagine I had a pen and I saw there was provisions in a bill I didn't like. I could just take that pen and I could strike it out. Congress could put it back in there with a 2/3 vote of both houses if they so chose, but that governors and mayors, our governor and our mayor, both have a line item veto. Bill Clinton had one until the Supreme Court smacked him and said, no, we're taking that away. It's not constitutional. So we would overturn that and say that the president can have a line item veto, but Congress can overturn it the way they do any other veto, because it would give them the ability to cut out pork barrel spending. I don't know if she's still there. Oh, she's still there. We could essentially say that in the COVID stimulus bill, 9% of it was actually COVID stimulus. The other 91% were going to various things that politicians wanted. If I were the president, I would have vetoed 91% of that bill, and the other 9% would be signed into law. Although anything that could be used to justify spending at a later date would also be line item vetoed. The other amendment would be a balanced budget amendment, meaning that Congress cannot deficit spend unless fully 2/3 of both houses would agree to deficit spend. Meaning it'd have to be very important, and it would have to have a lot of bipartisan support to do it. But also, the method in which we budget things would have to change. We could not ever use the same budget twice. We'd have to start from scratch every time. And with the zero-based budgeting amendment, zero-based budgeting, which I would add in to that balanced budget amendment, so Congress have a similar way of doing the budget without doing a carbon copy. Zero-based budgeting, I don't know if I properly explained earlier on when I first said the term, but zero is a method in which all expenses must be justified and approved for each new period. It was developed in the 1970s. It starts from a zero base and at the beginning of every budget period, analyzing needs and costs of every function within an organization and allocating funds accordingly, regardless of how much money has previously been budgeted to any given line item. There are benefits and advantages. The benefits are accuracy, efficiency, reduced waste, coordination, communication, but the disadvantages are bloat, intangible justifications, as you mentioned earlier, managerial time, slower response time, and bureaucracy. So I will concede that it's not perfect, but it's certainly better than what we've got now. And I will yield back to you.
Yeah, I guess I agree with a lot of that too. I mean, when losing my train of thought, the line item veto, I think I don't understand completely how that is going to like why that's so important and how it's going to affect this process that you're talking about. So I'm just going to ask you right now what you're saying.
Okay. Well, I go back to history as an example. So in the 1990s, conservatism was on the rise and liberalism was in retreat. And governors and mayors really found that they themselves could prove that they could spend money more efficiently by vetoing out spending they didn't like. They didn't have to veto the whole thing, because currently the president has to sign it or veto it or let it go into law without his signature. but governors and mayors could simply take the pen, and any part of the bill that they don't like, they can scratch that out, they can put a line through it, and it's not there anymore in terms of how the Constitution recognizes it. Now, why it's so important is that bills are often having a number of good things in it that help people. They have a bunch of poison pills in there, like during one of the earlier COVID bills, I think one of the first COVID stimulus, the Kennedy Institute got, I think, $25 million in funds from the feds, but they still shafted their workers and got the money anyway. But also, there's a lot of pet projects in the districts of U.S. representatives that they want to have in exchange for their votes, which is known as pork barrel spending. It's and because I'm interested, I in the interest of full disclosure, I'm going to go and get the definition of pork barrel spending. But it's important because if we want to if we want people to be less unenthusiastic about paying taxes, we have to empower the president to have the same power as 43 governors and God knows how many mayors, so that they can scratch out unjustified spending. So they don't have to veto the whole thing, but just parts that they do not like. And Congress would still have the power with a 2/3 vote, both houses, to overturn a line item veto the same way they do the regular one. Citizens Against Government Waste outlines 7 criteria by which spending in the United States can be classified as pork. Requested by only one chamber of Congress, not specifically authorized, not competitively awarded, not requested by the president, greatly exceeds the president's budget request or previous year's funding, it's not the subject of congressional hearings, so that it can go through scrutiny through the democratic process and because of transparency, and only serves a special interest or a local one. And the Congress banned pork barrel spending for a number of years, and it was honestly a good thing they did because of the fact that it made it harder for these politicians to make the taxpayers of Idaho subsidize their pet project in New Jersey or New York, where they have no interest in anyone else's tax dollars and their own constituents. So they're going to waste the tax dollars of everybody else. And with that, I yield back.
So I guess I have a question from that. If that's what would be happening so frequently with this, how would we stop, like in places like Alabama, Oklahoma, where lots of problems with like progressive issues are happening, and if those were to come across the table and they could just be line item vetoed, like what's going on with this? How could we combat that? Like any issues that may come from that?
I'm going to need you to be a little more specific, like progressive issues that are going on in places like Alabama and Oklahoma. Are we talking about like dollars that they would get for, I don't know, issues like healthcare, education? Are we talking about that?
Yeah.
Well, it would have to be, if we're going to give them the money, in order for it not to be line item vetoed, they would have to justify the expenses up front. They would have to agree that any money they don't spend, any money they have left over would go back to Congress. What you don't use, you don't keep. That is also a big problem of military spending, is they'll use it all, even if they don't need it, because if they don't use it all, well, Congress is not going to appropriate that same amount again. So transparency and accountability are ways that that example can work, so that Oklahoma and Alabama, if they have even one remotely progressive representative on the federal level there, they could avoid having that line item vetoed as long as they're transparent and the money they're requesting is not from just one chamber of Congress, it comes from both chambers, and that if it does serve a local interest, they could either be as frugal but thorough as possible, or they could decide this is not the right format, Congress. They could go to the state legislature or to this local government of the area in question and say, let's see if we can chip away at this problem, because incremental progress is still progress. But it's important that we know that any money that we're going to give out to these local districts is going to be spent wisely, and that they don't keep what they don't spend. That would be my answer to that question.
Okay. I actually have to wrap this up because my family is calling me. But if you have anything else to say, I am here for it. You're muted again.
Anyway, basically going to go into a very quick closing statement. So first things first, we should expect so much from the government because we're always going to be disappointed. And also, you have the right to keep every dollar that you make. And it's not about if you actually need that money. It's the fact you've made that money, and you have every right to expect to keep as much of it as you can. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the state needs to be radically downsized because of its abuse of power, whether it's at Black people or just simply the fact they erode our constitutional rights. At the end of the day, the American people need to ask less of the government, because they're not always going to they're going to see that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And that is effectively where I yield. The rest of the time's yours.
Okay, I guess I can say that I really agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I can see how that would really effectively help people. Um, so I really appreciate this, and I appreciate the other point of view that I'm getting on this. I just, and not that you disagree, I just don't really think um, that we should not be doing these other things on top of whatever we're doing to combat issues with taxes. We should also be helping the people directly with what's going on with the money that could go directly to them. And then with that, we wouldn't have to change things so bad, like so extremely, is how it would be for my point of view. So for that, I yield my time.
Okay, so that will be the end of the debate. Hello, Kenzie. I hope you're doing well. That'll be the end of the debate, everybody. If anyone wants a debate, they can just message me, and I'll be more than willing to have that debate with them. I hope you all have a lovely evening, and maybe the next debate me and Annabell can have is either on the subject of abortion or the question, is it all men? As we already know, that will totally not be a contentious topic. Thank you to everyone who joined. Thanks to Annabell for spending an hour of her time with me tonight. And with that, we'll see what happens.
Bye.